All right, I think we've got everyone here. Yeah. Where is... All right, Josh, let's start off with House Bill 368.
House Bill 368 prohibits the Motor Vehicle Administration from assessing a penalty for a vehicle whose required insurance has terminated or lapsed if the vehicle's registration plates are returned within 10 days of the termination or lapse, and one of the following conditions is met. 1, the title for the vehicle has been transferred to a new owner. 2, the registered owner has moved out of state and the plates are returned by mail. 3, a salvage certificate has been issued. Or 4, a licensed dealer has taken possession of the vehicle and the obligation to return the plates.
Why exactly is this bill necessary? Because you get the plates, you just drop them at the drop box now or whatever. Like, what's the problem?
Apparently, that's not working out for some people. I don't know the answer to that.
The sponsor actually had a constituent for whom this was a problem.
What?
They-
What's the problem?
There was a delay. Hang on. I know that if you can go back and look at the testimony. Yeah, 368 on the second page.
I just remember I thought MVA had I'm gonna pull up my testimony. They had a whole like thing on this saying they already deal with all this stuff. Where's MVA's letter?
There was a penalty. If you look at his testimony, goes through it pretty carefully. With the cancellation of insurance and when you return the plates. And there was a penalty issued to somebody who had canceled the insurance after returning their license plates, but before the license plates had been processed by the MVA.
Currently, MDOT requires customers return tags before canceling insurance on a vehicle. If a customer cancels their insurance prior to receiving a receipt for returning their tags, this can result in a fine being assessed for a lapse in insurance coverage. Yeah, because they have an automated system now that checks constantly to make sure that you have insurance on vehicles.
So there's a 5-day grace period. All this bill does is extend it to 10 days to make sure that the timing works out right.
If returns of plates vehicles is transferred within 10 days. Well, it says right here, the House bill would prohibit it within 10 days currently.
The 10 days should just make sure that the plates are returned before the penalty is instituted because of the lapse of insurance.
Returned their plates. They were on time, but they still were fined. They returned it by mail.
Just a little more time.
Okay, it's fine.
Okay. Sorry, so, hold on. Yeah, sure. Senator Castley.
But, so, one of the ways you get around, so of course, this is whether or not you have insurance, right? Which is a pretty important thing, right? Your vehicle insurance. And one way it says that they can't do this if the title of the vehicle has been transferred to a new owner. So it doesn't say that the title has to be transferred to a new owner and recorded with the MVA. It just says that it's transferred to a new owner. So I can get out of these. I mean, I can avoid the insurance requirement by just simply, I don't pay my insurance. I transfer the vehicle to my wife's name. I never record that, but it's transferred, and she paid me $1 for the car. I mean, this stuff is easy. This is important stuff, and
But to transfer, you gotta go through all that paperwork at the MVA. You gotta pay.
it doesn't say that.
No, but to transfer a title to somebody, you gotta go through the MVA and transfer the title.
Well, this doesn't say that it's transferred through the MVA. It just says transferred to a new owner.
But a title has to be transferred through the MVA.
No, I can just sign you I can sign you, this could either.
Oh, I
mean-
see what you're saying. But you still have to title it, don't you, through the MVA? Well, just because you sign it over, you still have to then go to the MVA and like do all
Where's
that.
counsel? Because, I mean, to me, transfer, I could just sign on the thing. If it actually has to go through the MVA, then that would be a completed transfer.
So Senator, it's 2 requirements. So starting on line 16 of page 2, the plates have to be returned, and one of those 4 things would have to happen. So you would have to return the plates within 10 days after the termination or lapse,
Okay, so
and
you
do
had
one
to
of those
return the
things.
plates.
Correct.
Okay. The plates returned, and then one of those 3.
Correct.
All right, then I'm fine with it. Never mind. Thank you.
Okay.
We really want to vote no.
All right, so the bill passes unanimously. All right. Now we're going to go to Senate Bill 91.
Okay.
Senate Bill 91. Or House Bill 91, sorry, my apologies.
This bill would require all notices of intention to preserve irredeemability to be filed with SSTAT, like all other ground rent-related documents. So currently, every ground leaseholder must hire a title company to prove that notices of intention to preserve irredeemability was not filed in the land records. So this is the only situation where an individual must hire a title company to prove that the ground rent document does not exist. This bill would end this requirement. So that an individual could just look at SSTAT's registry to locate this information.
There's been a motion for favorable, it's been seconded. Any discussion? All right. Everyone's okay? Excellent. We go to House Bill 107 next.
Okay.
So House Bill 107.
Okay, so this bill requires an updated survey every 5 years of the reserves needed for future major repairs and replacements of the common elements of a cooperative housing corporation or a condominium, or the common areas of a homeowner or of an HOA. The bill repeals statutory provisions that limits application to the required reserve studies and related provisions only to these types of communities in Montgomery and Prince George's counties. The bill specifies that these reserve studies are applicable only to residential communities. So we had a similar bill heard this session that applied to Prince George's County, so this is the statewide version of that bill.
Question I got, this bill's been introduced every year since 2019 and never moved. There must have been some problem or some issue with it.
So there's currently, this requirement is in place in Montgomery County, and then a previous year, 2000, since I've been here, this bill was introduced and it was made a local law to see how it would go in Prince George's County. So this year we have both the statewide bill and the Prince George's County. So it has been in effect in at least 2 counties in Maryland. So we had a Prince George's bill this year that was just making like minor adjustments that this bill also makes to the Prince George's section.
Okay.
The only changes that this bill would make that would be that if the entity does the reserve study, they have 3 years, 3 fiscal budget years to obtain the funds.
Okay.
Senator Watson has made a motion. It's been seconded, but discussion, Senator Castley.
So there's no amendments put on this at all, right? No. I was looking at the building industry's opposition, or not, they were favorable with the amendment, and the amendment would be that allow the homeowners to avoid, the HOAs to avoid this expense of a reverse study if they do not own condominiums that have the potential to require expensive replacements and repairs and thus maintain funding levels in order to meet those obligations. I mean, the concern of these bills historically has been, these are expensive, and every 5 years you have to do a reserve study. I think it was 3, it's up to 5. There was substantial expense on that, so, and it's coming out of the homeowners, right? I mean, these things have already been transferred out, so you're telling a group of 6 people in a condo or association or that they have to have this done, and they gotta pay for it, out of their pockets, unless it's brand new, I guess, which could be set up by the original owner, right?
Reserve study, and then the bill, it's an updated reserve study, so it's not a brand new one every 5 years.
So it might be a little bit cheaper if it's not brand new.
Yeah.
But do we have any information on what the cost of initial reserve study was? Was that part of the testimony at all?
I do not have that information. So it's not just the study, it's the making up the reserves.
So you pay for the study and also funding the reserve, both? Right, and then what's the, if an association doesn't do that, then what happens? I mean, are there consequences if they don't do this?
Not in the bill. Don't think so. Not that I'm aware of.
And then can I ask you, on page 7, it says this paragraph applies only to condominium in a county other than Prince George's and Montgomery County. What is that doing? What's that piece of the?
The study was already implemented in Prince George's and Montgomery. The requirement.
Right, I got it, but it says, so these don't apply under this paragraph? Okay, so it doesn't give them those grace periods or whatever, all right. All right, well,
And these are in response to like that would happen in Florida or like is just the, got it.
There's a pretty good letter here, though.
Reserve study over 3 immediately successive budget cycles following the fiscal year in which the initial reserve study is conducted.
They're arguing, it is our opinion that HB 107 be revised and includes language allowing community associations to fund the recommendations set forth in the reserve studies over a period of up to 3 years successive budget cycles with that funding commenced with the first of 80%.
so page 9, the bill, it has the amendment in there. It doesn't, it says you have 3
doesn't say-
successive
it doesn't
years,
say the
but it doesn't
percentage.
say
Yeah.
those percentages.
Okay.
I think the testimony that you're looking at, if you look on the far right-hand column, you can sort it by committee. I think you might be looking at ENT testimony, not JPR.
I didn't know you could sort that. How do you do that? How do you sort it?
Just click on the
This is very confusing. So a reserve study is going to figure out how much it's going to cost to replace the building. Could be a 12-story condominium building. And the owners of the condominium have to fund a reserve over the course of 3 years to replace the entire condominium building? No. What's that? Where's that?
I saw it, hold on.
On page 9. Line 1.
That's 3 years. Where's the 10th? Oh, I see. The section, applies only. I don't see, did somebody point out to me the bill where it says you don't have to pay more than $10,000?
No. If the. For which the total initial purchase and installation for all the costs of all the components identified in subsection A1 of this section is at least $10,000.
Of course, in any condominium, the components are going to be more than $10,000. So you've got a 12-story condominium building. The reserve study says it would cost $80 million to replace the building. Are we requiring the condominium owners to fund a reserve to the tune of $80 million over the tune of 3 years? That doesn't work.
Clarification. It's my understanding, talking to Delegate Holmes, this is about common areas only, not the place where they physically live, but if there is a recreation center, if there is a pool, if there is a meeting place, these are common areas, not the physical place in which someone resides. And maybe that's not clear, but I know that that was the intent of this.
I'm not.
So we're gonna just table this, we'll come back to this, at the end of the calendar, all right?
Why'd they bring up that building in Florida then?
That's what I was thinking about. I thought this bill was generated by that problem in Florida.
Yeah, they referenced it.
All right, Josh, let's go on to, House Bill 67 and
So House Bill 67, the committee has both this bill and the Senate crossfile, which is Senate Bill 977. And there was an amendment in your packet to conform the Senate bill to the House bill. The House bill specifies that to the extent possible, the Commissioner of Correction may not prohibit an inmate placed in restrictive housing or solitary confinement from having access to a reentry specialist or case manager within 180 days before the inmate is released. $977, yep.
let's just do House version first. Are there questions about the House version?
What are we conforming it to?
Nothing right now, if we do this, it'll be the House,
We're gonna go with the House version?
correct. So 67, House Bill 67. And it would just be a motion for favorable.
I think there was a second packet that was dropped off.
Amendment that's 625.
So that amendment is for the Senate bill. So right now we're on the House bill, so if you just hold it.
Look it up on your
Senate
system.
This is what it looks like here.
House Bill 67.
This is a House bill, isn't it?
Yes. this, and this SB amendment here, number 625.
The amendment will make the Senate bill into the House bill.
Or I can look at what you just put on my desk, and it's the same thing. Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. Okay, thank you. I have no more questions. This is easy.
On the House bill?
That's a bill for next year.
Okay, yeah, that's a good bill. That would be a good bill. I know, that's crazy. Okay, so it's been seconded. Everyone's okay? All right, great. Now we're on to Senate Bill 977, and the motion is to conform 977 to House Bill 67. It's been seconded. Everyone's okay? Great. So now the motion's favorable with amendments. We're gonna roll the bill. All right, everyone's good. Excellent. All right. Let's go to House Bill 487.
So the committee has both House Bill 487 and the Senate crossfile, which is Senate Bill 613. The bill establishes requirements and procedures for non-consensual towing of certain commercial vehicles at the request of the state police. There's an amendment in your packet for the Senate bill. It's not in your packet, but the committee also has an identical amendment to the House bill. The amendment would make a number of changes. First, it would change the term non-consensual towing to police-initiated towing.
Amendment, right?
Yeah, so the amendment is to Senate Bill 613.
Right, and it's number 728/1.
Correct.
Thank you.
So it would change the term non-consensual towing. It would change the definitions of medium and heavy-duty towing, which are based on the weight of the vehicle being towed. Rather than in the original bill, the Department of State Police setting rates for towing, under the amendment, companies would be required to make their rates publicly available and to eventually ban the use of per-pound billing. And finally, the amendments would make the changes to the process for when there are genuine disputes over invoices between towers and vehicle owners. Before a vehicle owner would be able to reclaim a vehicle or their cargo, the amendments would provide that certain things have to be provided. So for cargo, proof of ownership and insurance would have to be provided, and for a vehicle to be reclaimed, the owner would have to pay at least 20% of the disputed invoice.
All parties, no, it can be on, yeah, that all parties have agreed to these amendments, and I want to thank them for taking so much time to work this out. There was a lot of hard work along the way, and both parties negotiated in good faith to get to where we are. I really appreciate it. And just for the record here, so part of this compromise involves the chairs sending a joint letter related to this issue. And, yep, so our chair has signed it. The House chair has indicated that he will sign it. And so with that, I think we are all good to go.
Okay, so the motion is to accept the amendments on the Senate bill. Okay, so
So to be clear, that's amendment 283-728/1.
correct.
Okay.
So it's been seconded, we're adopting that. So now the bill's before you as amended, the motion's for favorable with amendment. Second, okay, great. Is it, now, everyone's okay? Excellent, okay, great. Now, we are on to House Bill 487. The motion is conform the House bill to what we just did in the Senate. Is everyone okay? It's been seconded, great. All right, both bills before you as amended, everyone's good? Great. All right. All right, we'll go to House Bill 850.
So there's an amendment in your packet, so this is both for the Senate bill and the House bill. This bill prohibits a local board of education and certain public and non-public schools that receive state funds from discriminating against, refusing enrollment of, or taking retaliatory action against a current or prospective student or the current prospective student's parent or guardian based on the individual's race, ethnicity, color, religion, sex, age, national origin, marital status, sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. The bill establishes a complaint, mediation, and appeal process for violations. And it specifies that all or part of the funding to the program may be withheld from a board, program, or school that violates the non-discriminatory requirements. So the amendment in your packet, it does 3 separate changes. So the first part is on page 3 of the reprint with respect to discrimination on the basis of religion by a religious non-public school. The amendment alters the list of exceptions. The change that appears on page 4 of the reprint, which states with respect to discrimination on the basis of disabilities, the bill does not apply to non-public schools that are in compliance to certain federal acts. This amendment was the portion of the amendment that was already adopted by the House. And then lastly, for the amendments on page 4 of the reprint, the amendment states that the bill does not require a religiously affiliated school to adopt any rule, regulation, or policy that conflicts with the school's religious or moral teachings, provided that the rule, regulation, or policy is not based on discrimination of the list of the protected classes.
Just want to adopt the amendments and then. So go ahead, can we adopt the amendments and then work off of the bill as amended? All right, second, everyone's okay with that? All right. So we're just gonna work off the Senate. Correct. Do we still figure out the administrative process?
I don't have any problem with the amendments. I'm not going to vote for this bill, just so you know. I mean, but the only other one was that one on page 3 at line 25, that the language in the phrases, and continually since the time of its establishment has limited. That serves no useful purpose. It would be nice if we just pulled that language out. I don't see any reason to include it, but I mean, that's a small exception in the otherwise grand scheme here. Sure. Proposal would be on page 3 of the reprint, line 24. It says pre-kindergarten program, school that limits, comma. Delete from that comma through to the following comma. That whole, so you're deleting the phrase, and continually since the time of its establishment has limited. So then the new would just say, that limits admission of students only to one sex. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that if you had a single-sex school or two, you switch to a single sex and you started back, yeah,
Right.
got it.
I mean, I understand a lot of these schools back, I mean, some of them go back to the early 1900s, and when they first opened,
They were
they
all-
might have been both
Co-ed,
co-ed.
yeah.
And then sometime in 1940, they went to a single-sex girl or single-sex boy school, and just,
My wife went to a single-sex girls' school in Roland Park Country School.
Yeah,
And back when I was 8, 9 years old, they took boys up through the 3rd grade. And that was discontinued, but they did take boys at one time.
I would second his motion to strike that. I don't know why.
No.
I don't know what significance that has to the bill.
I think you're right. All right, so is everyone okay with taking that? All right,
I had a question for, actually, I'm curious. 'Cause last year, I thought we all voted for this and it was all worked out and I thought you were like involved last year in doing it. Why are you opposing it this year?
I know, I'm going to support the amendment. I'll vote for the amendment that we're just putting in, introduction of the amendment, but ultimately, when it comes to the bill,
Yeah.
I see no reason to limit these schools' ability to do what they want to do. I understand it's going to go through the General Assembly, I got it, but I'm just.
In this one last year, we pushed out like unanimously though.
amendment, there's Senator Walsh-Recker, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's easy to get lost in the amendments, and I appreciate all the hard work that was put into the amendments, but I did want to kind of bring us back to the core of the bill and perhaps your question, which is why do we have these restrictions on private schools? The answer is, in my mind, is very easy, actually. We have these restrictions on private schools because they're accepting state money. And if they accept state money, they should conform to the values that we hold as a state legislature and the values of non-discrimination. Gay and lesbian children should not be discriminated against. Their parents should not be discriminated against. Transgender children should not be discriminated against. Their parents shouldn't be discriminated against. No one should be discriminated on the basis of their race or on their disability, which very critically is in this bill. And so I vote for this bill proudly and happy to bind private schools who accept our money to the values that we share as a legislature, the values of non-discrimination, that no one should be forced in their own school, if that school accepts state money, to feel less than. So I'm going to vote yes on the bill as amended.
Just and I understand that there's an agreement between both sides, but just out of curiosity and looking at I'm looking at page 3 of section 2. Whomever was involved in the discussions, would you mind just going through 2I through, 2-1 through 5? Just for the record, which each of these exemptions or carve-outs, what we're trying to get at? I know in particular the one granting tuition discounts for a student. I mean, what's going on here?
So a number of churches and synagogues and perhaps mosques as well, although that I'm not familiar with, provide a discount to their own parishioners. So if you are a parishioner of a Catholic school, you are often provided a discount. If you are not a parishioner, in other words, you don't attend that church, you are not provided that discount. And my understanding of the way it works for Catholic schools and perhaps for some Jewish schools as well that are associated with synagogues or movements is that people who are parishioners or members of that movement are expected to provide donations outside of the school universe. And so they're able to pay less for their schooling because they are donating separately to the underlying church or synagogue. And so the advocates on both sides agreed that if such a discount is provided, that is not an discriminatory. It is not an act of discrimination. It's a simple kind of routine use of that in the church and church and synagogue community.
I see the words on the page, but I'm trying to, how this really works in real life situations. I mean, declining to provide instruction in beliefs that are different from the religion with which the program or school is affiliated. So I attended a Catholic school from 3rd to the 8th grade. I'm not Catholic. Is this saying, so this is saying, with respect to the discrimination on the basis of religion, that school that I went to would not be deemed to be discriminating if they decline to provide instruction in beliefs that are different from.
If you're Muslim, they don't have to teach you. Exactly.
Gotcha. All right. Thank you.
This is a Catholic school.
Thank you.
Thank you. I make a motion. Have we accepted the amendments already?
Yeah.
Okay, so I make a motion for a favorable with amendments.
All right, roll call.
Vice Chair Waldstreicher.
Yes.
Senator Lee.
Yes.
Senator Castley.
Pass.
Senator Heddleman.
Yes.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Sidnor.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Bailey.
Pass.
Senator Carter.
Yes.
Senator Huff.
What? It comes back to you over time. Yeah, okay, good, pass.
Senator Castley.
No.
Senator Bailey.
No. I mean, look, I voted for the thing. I voted for it last year, and I think this is actually better than the one from last year. Yes.
Thank you. Chairman Smith.
Yes. All right, the bill passes with amendments. What was the score? What was the final vote?
9-2.
9-2. All right, now we'll move on to House Bill 850, And the motion will be to conform House Bill 850 to what we just did with Senate Bill 666.
So moved.
Seconded, and everyone will record the same vote? All right.
Should we change that Senate number?
I know. I think that was done on purpose. All right, we're gonna go back to House Bill 107.
So going back to House Bill 107, this is the bill that requires the reserve studies or an updated reserve study every 5 years. To clarify, the reserve studies is looking at the structural, mechanical, and electrical and plumbing components of the common elements and any other components that are the responsibility of the council of the unit owners to repair and replace. The entity will have 3 years after the study to comply with the reserves requirement.
So did we figure out whether or not we're talking about the Florida situation where they have to replace the whole building, or a situation where there's a problem with a hallway and they need to re-wallpaper the hallway?
It's the common elements, so the structural, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing components of the common elements.
Structural.
Structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing.
Would that include fire? I have an issue with building in my district that isn't out of compliance with fire code stuff, and so sprinkler system, and it is a big ticket item. Would that fall under what you're?
It was like the sprinkler system,
Actually, there
plumbing
isn't,
portion of
there
it?
isn't a sprinkler system, and they are obligated to put one in.
They're new builds. It'd be a code violation.
Senator West, you're asking me about common elements and common areas. Council has a definition for you.
All the condominium except the units. It's all the condominium except the units.
Right, but it says structural, mechanical, electrical and plumbing, so that means the
Of the
entire,
common
the
elements.
entire building, basically, right? Structural,
Common elements means all the condominium except the units.
right. But if the unit is up on the 12th floor, structural would mean everything that holds the unit up on the 12th floor so that it doesn't fall down to the ground, which would mean all the
Structural.
steel and everything else that's in the building. That would be structural.
Playground, pools, all common areas, this comes from the sponsor, maintained by the HOA or condo. So what you're talking about, Senator West, you know, look at a community facility that has plumbing, that has HVAC, that has fire and all those things in it, but not the physical units that individuals are living in.
I get that. So, but if you were going to, I'm looking at the first page, the second page of the bill, this reserve study states the normal useful life and the estimated remaining useful life of each identified component, which includes all the structural and mechanical stuff. States the estimated cost of repair or replacement of each component, including all the structural stuff, and states the estimated annual reserve amount necessary to accomplish any identified future repair. And so if the useful life, let's say, is 100 years, as I read the bill, it would require 1/100th of that amount to be put in reserve each year for 100 years. So when the building needs to be replaced 100 years down the road, the money's there to do it, right? But then I get further in the bill, and it talks about how
If you look at the original law, from which this is derived, for Prince, when this was just applied to Prince George's and Montgomery, and if you look on the bottom of page 8, line 31, 32, and the top of page 9, lines 1 and 2, it said that the reserves provided for in the annual budget under subsection C of this section shall be the funding amount recommended in the most recent reserve study. Okay, so then you say, well, what is that? What does that mean? If you go down to line 17, the reserve study has to state the estimated annual reserve amount necessary to accomplish the identified future repair or replacement. So they're going to give you an estimated annual payment that you're supposed to be making, and that's what you can pay. But when I look at the amendment, so that's situation A, which applies to Montgomery and Prince George's. They estimate an annual amount that you should be putting forth, and then you start putting that in. But the amendment says that the governing body has to fund, it doesn't use those terms, estimated annual amount. It just says they have to fund the reserves required by the initial reserve study over 3 years. So I think that we really need an amendment in here that would say on page 9, line 3, the governing body may fund the, and then insert estimated annual reserve amount, or estimated annual reserves. So insert the word estimated annual, because it appears to, as I look at the bill, it's sort of talking like gross amounts, which could be $100,000. You're going to fund it over 3 years. But the reserve study is going to make an estimated annual amount. So I think that it ought to say that you can break that estimated annual amount down over 3 years, simply because people aren't going to be ready for that, right? And that's why they're giving you I think that's why the bill gives you 3 years to do that. So people aren't hit year one, suddenly you've got this bill you weren't expecting. Otherwise, this appears to me to say that the entire reserve amount has to be funded over 3 years, which is not.
So I suppose that's what it's from. Is that right? Because I mean, what if you're strapped with like $100 billion, settlement,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you're sitting in your condo and you're fees go up for years, like split over like 12 or 15 years. Is that what that?
Yeah, it authorizes
The rent?
Yeah.
It does what, Heather, what'd you say?
It does authorize them to raise funds.
It's immediately. It's 3 years immediately. So you got 3 years to pay that $100 million.
But 80% upfront.
There's
There's none of that.
no, you have
It's not
3
in it.
years to get the it's what Senator Castley was referencing, page 9, lines 3 through 6. The governing body may fund the reserve required the initial reserve study over 3 immediately successive budget cycles following the fiscal year in which the initial reserve study is conducted. So I believe Senator Castley is suggesting the governing body may fund the estimated annual reserve amount.
Right, which I take that language from this, just below that on line 18, where it talks about the estimated annual reserve amount. That's where I get that language from.
Yeah, from current law.
I'm just trying to, if this thing was working in Montgomery and Prince George's, then I think it's important that we mirror that.
We should probably figure that. Do we know how does it work in Montgomery yet?
They claim in one of the letters that it's causing increased pricing.
I mean, it can't be that you have to pay the whole thing within 3 years.
You would have heard that.
You can,
Well-
that's a big schwack with a
That's
big.
because this 3-year requirement's brand new. That's being added in this bill.
I know, but it's got, in Montgomery County, they have to have done something to plug the cost.
It says this section applies to homeowners established in Prince George's County on or after October 1st, 2020.
So it's only been a year since they've been moved in.
So this bill's only going to affect Prince George's for a year? The current law?
It only applies to homeowners associations that are established after 2020. So all the things before.
Well, there's not going to be any because they're brand new houses. So does this apply to everything going back?
Is this prospective, is up to everything before?
So this is totally different than what's already taken place in Prince George's and Montgomery. Because if it's a brand new building, the costs are like totally low. Yeah, in 3 years we.
Also, like, you never have a chance to, I mean, who's gonna know within 6 months or a year?
But if you take in Montgomery Village, one of those, condos that are built in 1968 or whatever, I mean, that's probably really affordable housing too. And you're going to throw a massive,
See, I don't understand why the bill tries to include the funding piece of it. To have the reserve study, because your real intent here is that people are on notice. I know. If I buy into this condo, I say, holy crap, here's your reserve study. You guys are 50 grand each behind on the reserve. I'm not buying in. I'm not, so to me, the real intent of the bill should have been, putting people on notice so I wouldn't buy into a condo and then find out that you have to.
You'd be saddled with a big
Yeah,
levy.
and so the whole funding mechanism kind of troubles me because it's tough to do a one-size-fits-all, because a lot of them, there isn't a whole lot, so it's not a big deal. But others, if you got a big nut to crack, you may have to do a 15-year plan or something. You hit people with these really big things. Seems to me the bill would have been a simpler, if it just said, we want a reserve study done, that makes so much sense to me. People who buy into condos, because I see that, and they find out that nobody looked at the repairs for the parking lot, and now we got all this money. So the funding just troubles me, because we're gonna saddle people with big money all the time.
Our area, we have a boatload of non-functional HOAs. We have the entrance facades that have been broken down by drunk drivers that has not been repaired because there's no funding in the HOA to handle it. We have playgrounds that are in all kinds of states of disrepair because there's never been any attention given to it. And Delegate Holmes and myself get these calls all the time. I typically refer him to Delegate Holmes because he's the expert on this. And this was his brainchild, because if the HOAs took an opportunity to assess the common areas that are used by everybody and figure out, what's the minimum cost to maintain this over time and make sure somehow that's put in the HOA's budget, then these things wouldn't deteriorate to such a state where they become eyesores and bring everybody's property value down. with that in my own neighborhood now. Yeah.
The whole proposal, I mean, I don't think this is a bad bill up to the point where how do we deal with allocating it out? It seems to me that it ought to be left to the,
So I've asked Delegate Holmes to come back over. He's walking through the front door as we speak.
okay.
You can just give him a second.
He's older, it takes him longer. No.
Yeah. Takes him a little time.
The concept of the bill, but we got a few, yeah, you can come up there if you want, or you can sit down, whatever you want to do.
Right here?
Sure, whatever you want to do. However, catch your breath first, I guess. All right, so we're on House Bill 107. Do you want a printout of it?
Yes,
You
please.
can follow along. All right,
I got
there
a
you
good
go.
idea, though, but go ahead and ask your question,
All right.
if you don't mind. I'm good.
So the question, and Senator Cassidy, you can go ahead too, but I have a question about when we did this for Prince George's and Montgomery, so it's any homeowners association that's established after October 1st, 2020 for Prince George's and October 2021 for Montgomery, and then this bill gets everyone else, the other 22 jurisdictions for October 1st, 2022.
That is correct.
Okay, so got it. All right, so then the second part is the amount of money. So when you have the study done, and let's say you get an assessment, it's like, let's say $100 million, right? You set up this tiered process where you have 3 years immediately, 3 immediate budget cycles after the assessment has been done to pay it back. Does that mean that you'd have to pay that $100 million within that 3 years?
No,
Okay.
no, and I'm glad you asked that question. I'm going to use your example of $100 million. That what you said, 100 million? Okay. Yes. So what the reserve study says, let me do it a different way. Part of the reserve study is the roof. The roof has a 40-year life. Let's say the roof costs $100,000, okay? You are now in year 5 of that lifespan of the 30-year roof. So you've got 25 years to put $100,000 into the bank account to buy a new roof. I'll give you a perfect example. I was on a HOA meeting last night with a group in Howard County. Not my jurisdiction, but people call all the time. They're in a condo. The sidewalks are all messed up. The roofs are all messed up. Their assessment had to be increased over a period of time, over 40 years, to fund the replacement of the items that they had not put in their bank account. So now the 3-year process that's in the bill now. If, for example, the reserve study says if the reserve study says you need to put in, each homeowner has to put in, each homeowner has to put in an extra $100 per month, all right, to meet that 40-year goal for the roof. Each homeowner has to put in extra $100 per month. With the 3-year phase-in says you put in 1/3 of that this year, 1/3 of that this year, and 1/3 of that the final year. That's what that means, okay? And I put that in this bill. The 1/3 phase-in is not in the 2 other bills, the Montgomery County and the Prince George's County. But I had got some discussions with other people and wanted some time frame to phase into getting to the 100% funding amount. But the whole funding, and back to your original question, the whole funding is for a 40-year lifespan or a 30-year lifespan, okay? So you don't have to put in, you put in money in increments to get to the end of life of that item.
So, but I guess what I'm saying is, so I have a slate roof, right? And when we bought the house, the owner said, look, you're never going to replace this roof, but in 40 years, you're going to have a completely new roof because every year you're going to place 3 or 4 new pieces of slate, and at the end of 40 years, the whole roof's gonna be new, but you're never gonna have like what you see people tear a roof off and put it back. So that's what you're describing.
Yes, sir.
So what happens though if you find something that is like critical and it needs to be repaired today?
Yeah, there are
Or-
two,
Yeah, good, that's it. That's the question.
you have two choices, three choices, actually. The first choice that you have is exactly what happened in Florida. The building collapses, you don't make any repairs, the building collapses, that kind of thing. That's the first choice. The second choice is you hit your HOA or your unit owners with a special assessment. There are communities in Prince George's County where just like your example, they have not set aside any funds. Therefore, there's a huge amount of money that's due to fix those things that they have not set monies aside for. Each owner of that HOA is being assessed, I think it's $8,000 special assessment, and they have 4 months to pay it because they have not put any money in the reserve study. The third example of what we're trying to do is what this is. You put the money in the bank periodically, so when the time frame for that item, roof, for example, is over, you have the money there. Now, you can borrow the money, okay? Or other avenues that are investment types to put that money into reserve account. I'm hoping I'm answering your question.
I still don't understand. You may have answered, but it may have just gone over. So what I don't understand is if something is more immediate, like it's more short term, and you've already kind of missed it. You've missed the boat on the 40-year lifespan. Let's say you're at the end of that 40-year lifespan, but you just discovered it, and it's about to fail. And so now you're on the hook for something that needs to be done more immediately, but you haven't had the time to invest and prepare for the cost that you're about to.
Yes. In that particular example, if something is about to fail, you must pay for it now. And hopefully, hopefully the common owner community has some monies in their account. If they don't have any monies in their account, they have to be specially assessed. And the special assessment is without this. The special assessment is going to take place with or without this. With this, they have an opportunity to borrow some money, and with this, they have an opportunity to incrementally phase in at 100%. But in your example, if something is failing now, they don't have the money now, each individual will be hit with a special assessment, which must be paid, like the example I just gave you, $6,000, $8,000 within 3 or 4 months. That's the only remedy that the common ownership communities have at their disposal right now.
All right, so then when let's say you buy into a co-op and then your boiler the boiler for the building goes out or you need to be repaired, do people typically borrow money? Like does the co-op borrow money, or do they just assess higher fees?
The normal methodology is to assess higher fees. Right. The community that I was on the phone with last night, they did a reserve study, and their reserve study indicated that they needed, I think I'm going from memory here, a 1-bedroom needed an additional $50 per month, a 2-bedroom was $70 per month, yada, 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 to add into, to get to the full funding. But they do have the opportunity to borrow money. They do have the opportunity to borrow money.
Just a quick question, because a lot of our conversations have been centered around co-ops and condominiums, so I'm trying to think of some examples of homeowners associations who, I mean, pretty much your townhomes and the single-family homes that may share just common land. What kind of expenses are you kind of foreseeing that those kinds of associations would be kind of dealing with?
Sure. In the bill, it says, in terms of your specific example, if it's an HOA, typically an HOA has responsibility for maintaining the streets, those are private streets. They have stormwater management ponds. They typically don't have roofs to deal with. Those are condos and co-ops. HOAs don't have to deal with roofs. but they have common areas. And in the bill, it says in certain areas, in terms of mechanical, electrical, all those kinds of things. But that is what you have to take care of. You have to pay for those in the reserve study. In an HOA, those are the typical examples. I'll give you another example. There's another community in Prince George's County where the roadway is failing. They have no money in their account. It's 24 units. All 24 of those units will not be able to drive into their community because the road is getting ready to collapse.
Thank you.
So I like the notice provision of the bill. I think we should do reserve studies. I like that. My concern is with the funding piece of it, okay? And here's an example to give. We have a parking lot that should have lasted many decades, but we find out they didn't really do a good job of it. The pavement's failing. There's 8 of us in the association. We have a choice. We go ahead and borrow a lot of money to pull out all the curbs and we do the sidewalks and all that at a great expense, or we decide, look, we're not going to do this right now. We're just going to forego that one. Yeah, we're going to all have to drive on cracking pavement. We're going to step over the divots in the sidewalk, and we're going to do this. I mean, we could get away with this for 10 or 20 years, but we're just not going to put that big money up front. We can't afford that. We're not a big wealthy condo. We're, inexpensive townhomes type things in a condo association. But this says, no, you don't have that choice. You've got to fund that within 3 years. And you get a lot of, this is not a wealthy group of people. These are people who are, lower level jobs, but they got their townhouse condos. And aren't we really telling them, no, you're going to have to go ahead and pull up the parking lot now, get the money, pull the parking lot now, make all those repairs, when they may say, look, it's just not, we're not wealthy people. We'll drive on cracking asphalt for the next decade, and over time we'll look at this. But why do we want to tell them, no, you're going to have to fix this now? Or, I mean, you can find other examples of that where you can live with it. I mean, you get a heating system, if it's a common heating system, and you say, this thing really should be repaired, but you can limp by with this thing. Your heat won't be as good. It'll break down once in a while. But the study is saying, well, you need to go ahead and put in $50,000 for new central heating system, and that's what they recommend. But the 8 of us just say, well, we'll just pay a little bit more electric utility bill or gas utility bill, whatever it is, for the next, until we really run into problems. This says, no, you're going to have to really stretch and do this. So that's my concern is,
Sure.
if I have a condo and everybody in there is making $200,000 a year, we can do this. But if there's a number of these things where these are not wealthy people. These are working folks who got the house, that was their life investment, and now they're on a pretty fixed income. Looks like this is inflexible.
Well, if I could address your question, particularly with the inflexible part of it.
Right.
As I indicated at the top, it's like that old car commercial with the oil filters. You either pay me now or pay me later.
Right.
The definitive part about that is you're going to pay. You're going to have to pay. And what HB 107 is attempting to do is make the payments easier. In your example with the parking area, where your 8 individuals say amongst themselves, we'll just skip over the potholes. If the reserve study, I'm using your exact example.
Yeah.
If the reserve study says that those potholes are okay for 8 to 10 years, then you fund that parking area over 8 to 10 years. You don't put the whole dollar amount for the entire parking lot right now. You fund it over time, which makes it more affordable. That's the whole purpose of this, is to make repairs
Right.
that you're going to have to make anyway.
Okay. I get it, but, so if I'm a guy doing reserve studies, and I don't have any experience in that, but if I'm the guy doing the reserve study, I'm gonna wanna say, this parking lot's failing, people shouldn't drive through potholes, you shouldn't have divots, you should have a good parking lot. And then then how do the owners say, wait, I got your advice. To me, we're gonna do it as advice. We should do this, we shouldn't have potholes, we shouldn't have to, it's tough to clear the snow, it's a mess. But the reserve study guy is gonna say, no, my expertise tells me that you should just go ahead and put a new parking lot in. But the owners now don't have the ability to go back and say, I got your advice, but we're gonna defer this out over, like you're saying, 10 years. I don't see where this lets them do that.
How is the assessment going to spend over 10 years? If the reserve study specialist will advise you over the time frame. And that's why I put in the bill very specific requirements for a reserve study specialist to do this job.
Right.
Because I don't want, and neither do you, I don't want a board member who is a very good professional in a corporate setting, making six figures, but has no experience in doing reserve studies, to be the one to do the reserve studies. That's why the requirements
get it.
for the person is very specific.
I just don't see why, so what if we get this reserve study, and we look, the 8 of us sit down, it says, no, you should repay, this thing's gotta be done in the next 3 years. This is not a good thing. You're gonna have to do this in 3 years. And the 8 of us sit down and say, we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna put the money in. Now what happens? They don't fund it, what happens?
All right?
Under the bill.
I'll explain that to you, too. I was very specific about not putting any penalties in this bill.
Right, I didn't see any.
Yeah, I was very specific about that. If, based upon your example, those 8 individuals decide not to put any money into reserve study,
Well, no, they fund the reserve study. They do the reserve study, but they're just not gonna do that part that said replace the parking lot right now.
I understand. So if those 8 individuals decide not to do that parking lot, what's going to have to happen to force them to do that is that one of those 8 is going to have to report the other 7 to the Attorney General's office. That's the only enforcement mechanism here. If no one says anything, no one knows anything. So if the 8 of you get together and say, we're not going to fund this, mum's the word, then eventually the parking lot collapses, and that's your own fault.
Right.
But you have that option.
Right. So, okay, now, continue. So I'm the one non-get-along of the 8, and I want my new parking lot. I make 3 times what everybody else there makes, and I'm like, no, put your money up, we want to do this. We go to the Attorney General. Then what, he can step in and force them, or what happens?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, he can. Yes, and without this, the Attorney General can still step in and force them to do it. If you look at your bylaws dictate that every common ownership community must maintain the common areas for the benefit of those purchasing it. So if you don't fund it, they can still call the Attorney General's office and say that you are violating your responsibilities as a board of director and you are not taking care of this property, and they can still take you to court. So either way, someone can, as I might say, rat you out, and the alternatives are exactly the same. The only difference with this is I'm giving you a methodology to pay for
No,
it.
I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can still get ratted out.
It's in the bill already, or? That's correct. No, is it in this, is it in the?
I can't hear what
It's
she's
not
saying.
in the bill,
That's what I'm saying. Okay.
so it's in the same, title. So Title 11 is the Maryland Condominium Act.
And that's the existing statewide condominium act.
Yeah, so.
Already provides
if-
that.
Yes, so under current law, if there's a violation, the consumer, the condo unit holder can report it to the OAG, and then, the OAG can follow the, 13-101, commercial law article, consumer protection, to follow through.
So it's already there. I gave you all those red books already the first part of the session, right? You should have already memorized it by now, right?
Gotcha.
But you said, they can already do that. But this gives them the opportunity to pay for it over time.
All right, Senator Heddleman and Senator West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to say, after today, I never want to live in a condominium. Listening. But no, I thank you for this work, because I hear from constituents a lot about these issues. So I do appreciate your breadth of knowledge on this issue. So do you see this as kind of a painful process every 5 years? Like, right, and as we get up to speed on this, because they haven't been doing these studies, and so it's incredibly painful in the beginning as you're ascertaining exactly what the needs are of each of these buildings. And then kind of you find out what they are, and I assume, I don't know what the lifespan is that they're looking at, but, you know, if they're looking at it for over 5 years, kind of what are those big structural issues of the building and the common spaces. But then, and then you have this schedule kind of laid out after you've done this survey and study. But then you're sort of going through this painful process every 5 years. Is that, and at the beginning is when it's kind of most dramatic. Is that?
You're correct. At the beginning is probably the most painful if the common ownership community has not put
Has
any
not
money
been doing
away at all.
Right.
Now, let me get to the point of your 5 year that you brought up. In this bill, that is not in the two other jurisdictions, Montgomery and Prince George's County. If you look at, I'm going to, page 7, line 21, 22, don't worry, I'll just read it to you. It's a couple words. An updated study.
So they don't have to do
An
it.
updated study. And the reason why that's in this bill, well, it's two reasons. The reason why that's in this bill and not any others is, first, I want to make sure that Montgomery and Prince George mirrored each other because there are only two with it. But I want this to override so that everyone in the state has the opportunity to have an updated study every 5 years. An updated study is about 25% of the initial study in terms of cost of the real estate preparer.
Gotcha.
25%.
That's what we're going to ask you is how much does a reserve study cost? But I bet you're going to tell me it depends on the size of the.
Yes, and in the testimony that I sent to you guys, I think I had some numbers in there. They are, and I know there is no real standard, but it's roughly in between. Let's take an HOA with about 100 houses. It's probably about $2,000, $2,500, $3,000, something like that. That's for the initial one. And up, the whole study. The whole study. You know, is in that range, and an updated is 25% of that. An updated study is 25% of that, which is done every 5 years for the updated.
President.
No, that's the whole study. That's the whole study.
Okay.
And that's the whole study. Yeah. Yeah. Don't push the button.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I should have known by this time, don't push the button. Malcolm, this is all interesting, and, Marvin, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
So I'm now thinking about that building in Florida that fell down. It's what, let's say 10 stories, it was a residential condominium. How much would the study have cost for that?
Let's expand what that actually was. That was not just one 10-story building.
Right, there were two, right?
Yeah, I think, that reserve, I don't know the exact
There's a twin down the
cost.
street.
Yeah, I don't know the exact cost of that. I can find that out because the reserve study specialist that did that study for that collapse in Florida is a reserve study specialist that is here in Maryland who advised me on this,
Okay.
okay?
So let's think about that building during my questions.
Yeah.
So what your bill requires is that each structural, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing component of the common elements needs to be subject to study, right?
That is correct, sir.
So 10-story building, the structural is all the steel that holds the building up.
That is correct.
That collapsed.
That is correct.
In that case. So it's fair to assume that a reserve study for a 10-story condominium building would suggest that the cost of rebuilding that building, including the structural, the mechanical, the electrical, is going to be a considerable amount of money. Many, many, many tens of millions of dollars,
Well, you used a word, rebuild.
right?
There's nothing in this legislation that talks about rebuilding anything. The whole purpose of this bill is to prohibit rebuilding.
It says repair and replace.
Yes. Now, when you said rebuild, I was thinking in my
I should have
mind.
used the word replace.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes, sir. You can't replace a 10-story building that's collapsed.
Okay, so you're talking, it's going to be a lot of money, though. When you
Yes,
finish the
sir.
study on a 10-story condominium
Yes, sir.
building, you're talking about a lot of money that would need to be put in reserve to repair and replace that building, correct?
And off the tip of my head here, those several condominiums, 10 stories high, their assessment was something along the lines of $2 or $3 million, or something like that, in the millions.
Right.
I don't quote me on the exact number, but it was in the millions.
Okay.
But, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But you have 10 stories times 3 of people to put that in there over a period of 30 years.
That's what I'm coming to. So let's turn to pages 5 and 6. 5 and 6 refer to residential condominiums. Sections 11-109, 109.2, subparts 1 and 2. And what, I'm now looking at the top of page 6, says the governing body may fund the reserves required by the initial reserve study over 3 immediately successive budget cycles following the fiscal year in which the initial reserve study is conducted.
Yes, sir.
So in my hypothetical situation, you've got a 10-story condominium, let's assume it's going to cost $50 million to replace it. And what this seems to say is that the owners of the condos in that building need to fund a reserve study to the tune of $50 million over the 3 successive budget cycles. Is that, am I reading this incorrectly?
You are 100% correct.
Well, that just sounds extraordinary. If I'm buying a condominium, I'm not about to buy a condominium and then fund the replacement of the entire building over 3 years.
His question, this is, I think I can add just one thing that if you help us understand, this will help, because I was exactly where you were
Right.
when I first asked that question, like 10 minutes ago.
Yep.
So it's our lack of familiarity of what's in the reserve study. The reserve study is going to reveal the kind of the lifespan for each element that needs to
Right.
be repaired. So if the lifespan is of 40 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever,
Right.
you have that amount of time to fund that project, but it's gonna give you that 3 years to put basically micro percentages of what that is over the course of time.
Well,
That's exactly correct. That's exactly correct.
okay. Now, if that's correct, that would make some sense. I think we could write this more clearly if that's their intent, because I can't tease that out of this language here.
It's brand new buildings though, right? These are all brand new.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This,
I didn't hear.
So let's assume that earlier we had the suggestion that $100 a month would do it. So you'd have to, each owner of a condo would have to kick in $100 every month. How does that figure into this 3-year time horizon?
Okay. Let's expand that $100 and let's, for simple numbers, let's just say that full funding is $100 per year. Okay? Okay?
Okay,
For simple math.
okay,
Full funding is $100 per year per person.
right,
Year 1,
right.
you can put in $70. Year 2, you can put in $80. Year 3, you put in $100.
But now you're behind. If it was supposed to
but-
be 100, 100, and 100, and you put in, what was it, 50, 70, and 100, you're, how many behind? You're
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
80 behind.
In that simple math, you are correct. However, the reserve study specialists who do these things will incorporate the 3-year time cycle. If you, as a board of directors, want to do it in a 3-year cycle or do it instantaneously, the reserve study specialist knows how to calculate that $70 that $80 and then $90. That's what they do for a living. They give you a reserve study and they say, you need $100 a year. And you say, oh, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do 70, 80, and 90. No problem. Here's how you do it. This is what they do for a living, nationally.
Are they going to end up with enough money in the fund, though?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If you don't put in $100 a year.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. The answer is definitively, without a shadow of a doubt, yes. And I was with one last night from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., going through a reserve study with them. They had all kinds of bar charts, et cetera, showing the escalation of the costs that they needed to fund at a 40-year period versus the amount of money that they were putting in right now.
Okay.
Things we're all thinking about is like the immediate problems, that's, I guess currently you have to handle that right away anyway. This bill doesn't touch that. So,
No, this-
I mean, eventually what will happen is that all these associations will be put on the right path of investing so that you have a long-term strategy to make sure you can fix these problems in an affordable manner, which is great. But I guess, Chris, you would finish your line of question, because I had one question about the language on page 6.
I just finished by saying, I get the concept, makes every bit of sense to me. I'm not sure that the language used in the bill clearly explains, teases out the concept. I think
are you talking about?
we could do some work on the bill to make sure it's clearer to the people who have not had this long colloquy, who are going to have to understand what this says once the bill gets enacted.
I'm hoping you're talking about additional discussions this year. Because this language that you see there at the top of page 6 was specific language that was given to me by the reserve studies specialists who do this. And I'm hopeful that, if you're going to revise it, that's up to you guys. This is in the possession of you guys.
It's exposing our lack of familiarity with like reserve studies, what's in it, how much they cost, how often they're usually done, how they evaluate whatever spec that you're talking about in terms of their lifespan and all that. We just don't have that I don't have that expertise. I'll speak for myself. My last question is on page 6, right where you were, Senator West. So is it so that you may fund the reserve required by the initial reserve study over 3 years, immediately successive cycles following the fiscal year in which the initial reserve study is conducted? So is it the initial reserve study, like as in the first one, or is it the one most recent? Because now we're saying you have to do it every 5 years. So does that apply to the one you just did, or is it the first one you ever did?
The one most recent. Okay? And in some cases, they could be the same. Like the community I talked with last night, they have never had one done, period, ever. And they're 40-some-odd years old. So the initial one is, in fact, their first one. And the only reason they're doing it is because it's, anyway. I'm hoping that I'm answering all of your questions.
No, this has been really instructive. I mean, this has been
And
enlightening.
I've got nothing to do. I can stay here all night. No, I'm good. I mean, to me, this is a pretty important bill. I just
No, it is. I remember you talked to me over the summer on this. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. We definitely want to get this right and get it done this year. Okay. Are there any other questions? Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a clarifying closeout set of questions. Delegate Holmes, just tell me if I'm right on with when this comes in place. The nexus for this bill is that, we had a lot of HOAs in our community that playgrounds were going in disrepair, the front facades were broken down, and many things common that mostly were external to an individual's home were not taken care of. And the reserve study was an attempt to make sure the HOA took these things into account so that these things could stay in a certain state of repair and not bring property values down. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct.
So and I think there's some confusion, at least I'm confused. So when you talk about the incident in Florida where a building collapsed, the building and the maintenance of the building and those individual units and the steel in those units and those types of things, that cost is borne by the landlord who receives your monthly payment. Is that not correct?
In this case, it's called the unit owners, the condo owners. That's correct. Each unit owner has to pay those fees. That's correct, unit owners.
But the fees you're talking about in this instance would be for those edifices that are external to an individual's specific unit that they reside in. Is that correct?
That is correct for a condo and a homeowners association. It is not not necessarily correct for a cooperative. I don't want to get into all of that, because I gave you guys that red book, didn't I? So it's not necessarily for co-ops. Co-ops are a totally different animal.
So for a multi-unit building, the assessment would not be done on the amount of money it takes to replace the entire building, right?
That is 100% correct.
Okay, I hope that tries to bring some clarity. I keep pushing towards the external things, the community, shared community things. So within a physical building, a day room would be included, right?
If the HOA or the condo was responsible to maintain it, the answer is yes. Yes, if they were responsible to maintain it, the answer is yes.
Okay. Because I just felt that there was some confusion with an entire building, trying to understand the cost to repair and thinking that cost over time was somehow borne by the tenants, when in fact it's not. What we're talking about are those external pieces of property, playgrounds, swimming pools, common areas, day rooms, those types of things, parking, pavement, those types of things, right?
That is correct, because those are the responsibility of the common ownership community to maintain.
All right. Thank you very much.
If I could, Mr. Chair, just very, very brief.
Yeah.
I know you guys, your time is short. There's also a provision in the bill that says if your governing documents state that your common ownership community has no common elements, this doesn't apply to you. So if your governing documents say you don't have anything that's a common element, you don't have to do this at all, because you've got nothing. And final point about that, Florida, part of the investigation that's underway now is saying that had they done the maintenance, it would not have collapsed. And I just want to leave it there.
No, I appreciate it. This is great. So so I appreciate you coming over here, because for a lot of us here, this is like just above watching paint dry. So, but this is a really important issue, and it's about public safety and health. So this is actually, I'm serious. Like this turned out to be a really interesting conversation. So I really appreciate you coming over. That's exactly what I'm going to say. That's exactly what I'm saying. Relax. So Senator West, Senator Castley, if you would be interested, and Senator Watson and I will sit together tomorrow morning or tomorrow, and we'll take a deep dive into this bill, and it'll be back on the list tomorrow. Okay, so we'll call you.
I'm at your total disposal.
Yeah. Coffee at that point in time, but maybe drinks afterwards. All right.
I'll sleep right here on the mat if you want me to.
There you go. Well, if you could stand by for 1 second, I'd like to bring up House Bill 1097. It's not on the list. Yep, 1097.
That's the appraisal bill.
Yeah, House Bill 1097 was the task force appraisal and valuation equity bill that we heard this afternoon. The task force will study strategies and actions that will help ensure the governmental oversight and industry standards and practices for further valuation equality, increase training of appraisers to combat valuation bias, remove barriers to entry into the appraisal profession by minorities, assist in the development of a model for a meaningful reconsideration of value process, reduce or eliminate bias related to automated valuation models and alternative property valuation methods, and 2, identify legislative and other policy recommendations that will provide a comprehensive and coordinated approach for reducing bias in valuations through enforcement, compliance, and other methods.
Motion for favorable has been seconded. Everyone's okay? Excellent. Thank you, Delegate. Yeah, we'll be back. We'll be in touch tomorrow. All right. I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I'm gonna send you guys new books every year now. Once you memorize them next year.
Seriously. This is really good. That was a really good discussion. All right. All right, can we do House Bill 824?
Do Edward's bill or not?
Do we need the amendments or is it?
Study, right?
No, just because you'd been talking about the Edwards, the landlord collection eviction data bill. You'd been talking about Edwards, eviction data bill. Did you want to do that one?
Aren't these the same?
Yeah, they're the same.
We're gonna move them both right now.
Okay.
Seriously, like, why can't we just move everyone vote?
We can.
Let's do it.
Is it?
Good.
Yeah, we're gonna move the Senate version too, I'm saying.
Yeah, both of them.
All right, is that, everyone's okay? You discuss the bill, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the judiciary might, I mean, if you look, they've got to collect all this every 2 weeks.
It changed, right? They amended that.
We're giving them money.
Oh,
Don't we have some amendments?
Yeah.
To make it a little longer? Like over a longer period of time, not 2 weeks?
So you should look at the House Bill third reader version, not the Senate bill. So the changes.
what's the House bill number?
It's each month instead of every 2 weeks.
Yeah, so the amendments adopted by the House changed the frequency that the judiciary must share the eviction data, so it's each month instead of every 2 weeks.
What's the number? What's the bill number on the
It's
House
House
bill?
Bill 824, if you
Thank
just
you.
go to your laptop and go to the third reading, that's why I wanted
Right.
to move on that first.
Right.
And they have to send all the data to GoCap.
And
Dude. My last year in the Senate, I'm definitely gonna be like, everything goes to GoCap.
How'd they get it to us? They got some widgets or something online, you can look it up.
yeah, the House amendment also altered the list of entities that may request the data in a certain format from the judiciary. Maryland judiciary was unfavorable because currently a lot of this information is in paper format, and MDEC is expected to be deployed in 2023.
All right. Can I suppose this?
Significant because we're, even in MDEC counties right now, you're still doing all the eviction stuff in paper format.
Paper.
And so it's not, I mean, once this, and they're saying MDEC comes on, this will be in MDEC when?
Well, Baltimore County this summer, this year.
Well, MDEC's on, no, MDEC comes on, but this capability in
No, they
MDEC,
said in Baltimore County
the landlord-tenant piece will be?
that's what they're piloting it in our county.
Come on, Mike. well, first amendment would be to knock out the census tract data. Is everyone okay with that?
Yes.
Okay,
514.
I know. House Bill 824 is before you as amended. The motion is for a favorable with amendment. It's been seconded. Everyone's okay? They report the data every 30 days. Correct.
2021.
23.
Sorry, 2023. January 1st, 2023.
We go back in
is
time,
the
back to the
effective date,
future.
And then strike the census tract.
Our recorder's you.
All right, so the Senate Bill 629, the motion is to conform 629 to 824. That we just approved, yep. I'm sorry, yes. We did, my apologies. We did the House Bill
Yeah.
for the amendments, now it's to conform 629 to what we just did in the House Bill. Yeah. Is everyone okay? Excellent. Same vote, all right, great.
Well, that was unanimous, right?
Unanimous, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, all right, Senator Josh, let's go to Senate Bill 653. And then,
Senate Bill 653 expands mandatory participation in the ignition interlock system to include an individual who is granted probation before judgment for driving while under the influence of alcohol, and an individual who is convicted or granted a probation before judgment for driving while impaired by alcohol. There is an amendment in your packet. It's number 983828/1. So the amendment would limit the bill's application to people who are granted probation before judgment for driving under the influence of alcohol, and it would give the court the authority to waive mandatory participation if the court finds that the participation is not necessary for the safety of the community. In addition, it would require the MVA to provide information on fee waivers to participants, and require that if the MVA does grant fee waivers, it must also waive fees for installation and removal of the system, as well as fees for the rental of the system.
We've spent a lot of time on this bill, meaning the advocates and I, trying to speak with each and every one of you and come up with amendments that will mollify some of the concerns that were expressed about this legislation last year. And so Josh did a wonderful job going through the amendments, but let me just kind of slow them down a little bit, the proposed amendments, so that you know what's in them and you know how they address some of the concerns that each of you has expressed. First, during the hearing this year, it was noted that 21902C was in the bill. That was a drafting error and should not have been in the bill. So amendment number 1 strikes the inclusion of 21-902C violations. Amendment number 2 is the most substantive of it, which provides essentially an escape hatch. And so the bill goes from being mandatory to essentially being presumptive, but providing an out so that when a judge makes a finding that it would be in the interest of judgment, interest of justice not to include an ignition interlock, that a judge could make such a finding. And so having that escape hatch, I think, is really important. And so if the judge finds it's in the interest of justice to waive the ignition interlock requirement, the court shall enter a finding waiving the ignition interlock requirement. Amendment number 3 is mostly clarifying that 21-902B convictions are required to do 6 months of the program. Amendment number 4, again, it's technical. We believe that there was a drafting error. Just to be clear, it's me who made the drafting errors. And so it's not clear why this was included in the final draft of the bill, but I think we are ready to take that out. And then amendment number 5 deals with the affordability issue. So this is an issue that has come up previously related to this. And so if someone qualifies for an MVA fee waiver under current law, they'd be eligible for 50% reduction in the fees related to the ignition interlock program. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd love to hear where people are, but I believe that the advocates behind the bill, including MAD, including Noah Liada's father, have done a really masterful job of trying to craft this in a way that satisfies every member of this committee.
Just, this is on the technical side, on the last page, 3, number 4, or down at the bottom. If the administration waives the fee requirement, the individual shall be eligible for. So I guess in the administration says, well, we've waived your fee, now we have discretion, we can also waive the installation and removal fees, and we could give you a 50% reduction in the interlock rental, right? That's still their decision, right? So they make a first decision. The first decision is, yes, we'll waive the fees, and then they can also say, and then they have the discretion to also waive the other 2.
That's my reading.
Okay, just want to make sure that's how I read it. Okay.
The 50%, right? Okay, thanks.
Floor at 10, and we have just a single session, so we're going to come back, do the same thing again. Do we have bill hearings tomorrow?
No.
So we have no bill hearings tomorrow. So we'll come back tomorrow, pick up on the voting list with the bills that we haven't finished up yet, and we put the consent calendar on for Thursday. So if all goes well, we'll be able to get those through cleared, meaning all goes well with everyone plays nicely on both sides of the street, which I fully anticipate will happen. But if that happens, then everything will continue to move, and we'll end session on a high note. Yeah, let's do for HB 107. I'll contact you. Yeah, we'll email you to see what time it's to sit down and do that. So we'll come back. We'll have a long time to vote. We'll have, Yeah, those are definitely, maybe, yeah, that's right. All right, I'll see you all. Have a good evening. Thank you. That's it.